Part 1. The honeymoon is over. Meet the Millers. They thought they bought a piece of the American dream. A quiet house on a cul-de-sac with a white picket fence. What they actually bought was a front-row ticket to a 5-year nightmare. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a slip of paper. A formal HOA violation for a trash can left out 2 hours past the deadline. The man behind the note was the enforcer, a neighbor with too much time, a high-def GoPro, and a personal vendetta against anyone he deemed unfit for his street. Within a month, the Millers weren't just living next to him. They were being hunted. Every time they stepped onto their own porch, the enforcer was there, clipboard in hand, documenting their every move like a prison guard on a yard watch. He began timing their guests, logging license plates, and even photographing the height of their grass with a ruler. Part 2. The Psychological Siege. When the letters didn't break the Millers' spirit, the enforcer turned up the heat. He installed security cameras that were positioned at awkward angles, aimed directly into the Millers' master bedroom and their children's play area. He claimed it was for perimeter safety, but the ring cam on the Millers' front door told a different story. It caught him creeping along the property line at 3 o'clock a.m., pouring industrial-grade salt into the grass. By morning, the Millers' pristine lawn was dead, burned into the shape of a massive middle finger visible from the street. Then came the dog baiting. The enforcer would stand just out of sight, using ultrasonic whistles to trigger the Millers' dogs into a barking frenzy, all while recording the noise to file disturbing the peace complaints with the county. He wanted them stressed, he wanted them broke, and he wanted them gone. Part 3. The Neighborhood Civil War. By the second year, the poison started to spread. The enforcer began recruiting other elderly neighbors, feeding them lies about the Millers being troublemakers and criminals. The neighborhood split in two. Pro-Miller families were met with anonymous flat tires and keyed doors, while those who sided with the enforcer were rewarded with protection. The Millers found themselves isolated, stared at in their own driveways, and excluded from neighborhood gatherings. The enforcer had successfully turned a private dispute into a community-wide civil war. The stress began to tear at the Millers' marriage. They stopped sleeping. Every floorboard creak in the middle of the night sounded like a trespasser. They were living in a high-stakes psychological thriller, and the villain lived 20 feet away. Part 4. The Digital Sabotage. When physical intimidation didn't force a for sale sign onto the Millers' lawn, the enforcer went digital. He created fake social media profiles using the Millers' names and photos, posting inflammatory comments on local community boards. He was trying to destroy their reputations before they could even walk into the local grocery store. Suddenly, the Millers were receiving harassing phone calls from strangers and wellness checks from local police based on anonymous tips about domestic disturbances that never happened. The enforcer was attempting to weaponize the system itself, turning the very people meant to protect the community into tools of his harassment. The Millers had to spend thousands on cybersecurity experts just to prove the IP addresses originated from the house next door. Part 5. The Financial Siege. The enforcer knew that if he couldn't break their spirits, he would break their bank accounts. He began filing frivolous small claims lawsuits for emotional distress caused by the Millers' outdoor wind chimes and the unauthorized color of their front door. Each week brought a new summons, a new filing fee, and a new day lost in a courtroom. He was playing a game of financial attrition, knowing that as a retiree with a pension, he had more time and fewer overhead costs than a young family trying to build a future. The Millers were forced to dip into their children's college funds just to keep up with the mounting legal defense. The enforcer didn't need to win the cases. He just needed to make the Millers' life so expensive that moving away was their only path to survival. Part 6. The Legal Stalemate. The Millers tried to go the right way. They hired a lawyer and filed for a preliminary injunction, but the enforcer knew the system better than they did. He filed countersuits, claiming the Millers were the ones harassing him. He showed up to court with stacks of evidence, mostly out-of-context photos of the Millers' kids playing, or the husband working in the garage. The legal system moves at a snail's pace, and for 18 months, the two families were locked in a financial death spiral. Every time the Millers spent $5,000 on a motion, the enforcer would file a handwritten response to drag it out another 60 days. It was a war of attrition, and the Millers were running out of ammunition. Part 7. The counter-sting operation. Realizing the police couldn't act on he said, she said, the Millers decided to stop being victims and start being investigators. They invested in a stealth cam network, cameras disguised as birdhouses, landscaping stones, and even fake PVC pipes. They learned the enforcer's schedule down to the second. They stopped reacting to his face-to-face insults and started collecting data in silence. They documented every time he threw trash over the fence, every time he peered through their windows with binoculars, and every time he tampered with their mail. They were no longer neighbors. They were opposing intelligence agencies in a suburban Cold War. They were building a digital file that would eventually become a criminal indictment. They even caught him using a slingshot to fire metal ball bearings at their solar panels in the middle of the night. Part 8. The night of the breaking point. The war reached its peak on a humid Tuesday night. After months of the Millers ignoring his provocations, the enforcer finally snapped. The security footage is chilling. He climbed into his heavy-duty SUV, put it in reverse, and slammed into the Millers' parked car in the driveway. He didn't stop. He pulled forward and did it again, the sound of crunching metal echoing through the quiet neighborhood. He thought the shadows of the night would hide his face, but he forgot about the birdhouse camera. The enforcer was caught in 4K, his face twisted in a manic smile as he systematically tried to total their only means of transportation. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Part 9. The neighborhood exorcism. The aftermath of the crash brought the whole block into the street. For the first time in years, the neighbors the enforcer had manipulated saw him for what he really was. As the police were looking at the live feed on Miller's phone, other neighbors started coming forward. One woman admitted he'd been filming her daughters. Another man showed proof that the enforcer had poisoned his hedges. The silent majority of the neighborhood finally broke their silence. It wasn't just the Millers' fight anymore. It was a collective reclamation of their street. The enforcer stood in his driveway, screaming about rights and property lines, while the handcuffs were finally clicked into place. Part 10. The final fallout. The end wasn't a shouting match. It was a gavel. The Millers didn't call the HOA this time. They called the district attorney. When the police raided the enforcer's home, they found more than just clipboards. They found hard drives filled with unauthorized footage of every neighbor on the block. The compilation of footage the Millers provided, the salt pouring, the stalking, the ultrasonic harassment, and the vehicular assault, painted a picture of a man who had moved past annoying and straight into predatory. The enforcer was led away to a state facility for a court-ordered evaluation before facing multiple felony charges. Part 11. The legacy of the war. The subsequent civil lawsuit was the final blow. The legal fees and court-ordered damages eventually forced the enforcer to sell his house to pay the Millers back. Today, a new family lives in that house, and the cul-de-sac is finally quiet. But the Millers still catch themselves checking their phone alerts at 3 a.m. They still look twice at every person with a clipboard. The grass has grown back, and the picket fence is freshly painted, but the 1,000-day war left a permanent mark. In the suburbs, your home is your castle. But never forget, you aren't the only one with a moat. Choose your neighbors wisely because once the war starts, there are no winners, just survivors.